state of Massachusetts in the United States of America. We are pleased to have Mother Tongue join us, and they're going to sing for you this morning. So let's begin the morning on that note, and please enjoy.
In the circle of earth and sky, my heart flies to yours. We gather, we remember, and the pattern endures. In the circle of earth and sky, my heart flies to yours. We gather, we remember, and the pattern endures. In the circle of earth and sky, my heart flies to yours. We gather, we remember, and the pattern endures. Join us. In the circle of earth and sky, my heart flies to yours. We gather, we remember, and the pattern endures. In the circle of earth and sky, my heart flies to yours. We gather, we remember, and the pattern endures. In the circle of earth and sky, my heart flies to yours. We gather, we remember, and the pattern endures.
How perfect. We gather, we remember, and the pattern endures. The circle of life. Who are we? Who are we? We're pagans. People call us pagans. People of the earth who honor indigenous cultures of Europe. We are what's left over of the root connection to cultures that have all but been forgotten. As pagans, we are here today to serve as a warning as to the fate that can belong to other indigenous cultures that are the highlight of this particular gathering. If those of us who have already experienced some of the things that are happening now do not step forward.
Take the water away. All we can see is the water and not you. And you Thank you. Thank you.
Is that better?
Thank you.
All right. At least it wasn't gurgling. So we're what's left. We're what's left to serve as a warning to other indigenous cultures that are in danger of extinction. And we are the ones who have preserved the stories and the traditions in the best way that we could over the centuries, so that we can be here today before you to explain some of the things that we do and some of the things that we are, and to clarify and answer some questions. One of the things that I'd like to address first off is what we are not. And I generally don't like to do that. I prefer to talk about what we are as opposed to what we're not. But what we are not is we're not anti-Christian. We don't senselessly torture and kill animals. We do not worship the devil. And we're not racists or white supremacists. And so just sort of leaving you with those ideas, which we'll expound on through this discussion. And to dispel anything going in. I'd like to take a moment to introduce us. My colleagues on the left here, on my left, Phyllis Curott. And Phyllis is a social and spiritual activist. She's an attorney and ordained Wiccan priestess and the best-selling author of several books, including the internationally acclaimed Book of Shadows, published in 15 countries. She's been honored by Jane Magazine, along with Hillary Clinton, as one of the 10 gutsiest women of the year, as an outspoken advocate in the courts and the media for the rights of Wiccans and other religious minorities. Phyllis was one of the finalists for the Walter Cronkite Faith and Freedom Award. She is currently working with Human Rights Watch to organize an international interfaith effort and petition to save the life of Fazla Hala, a Saudi Arabian woman who has been condemned for beheading the alleged practice of witchcraft.
Could you stand up? I mean, we really can't see back here. I just wondered if she could stand up. Oh, goodness.
This is a game show, right?
She is.
Described by New York Magazine as one of the culture's hippest and most intellectually cutting-edge thinkers. Phyllis is a pioneering spiritual teacher whose work addresses the return of the divine feminine and the resacralization of our relationship with the earth. She's founder and president of the Temple of Ara, one of the oldest international Wiccan congregations. It is a shamanic tradition rooted in the indigenous traditions of Europe. So Phyllis, thank you for coming and welcome. And then Andras, I guess you're going to have to stand up too.
I'm standing up. I'm short.
Andras Corban-Arthen is the founder and spiritual director of the Earth Spirit Community, an international religious and educational organization established in 1977, which is dedicated to the preservation and development of earth-centered spirituality, culture, and community with a special focus on the indigenous European pagan traditions. In 1990, he was one of the organizers and celebrants of the interfaith ceremony that launched Boston's 20th celebration of Earth Day, which drew 250,000 people. And in 1991, he was chosen to be the representative of the indigenous European traditions at the United Nations Interfaith Conference on Religion and Prejudice. Andras was a featured speaker at the Parliament of the World's Religions held in Chicago in 1993 and in Barcelona in 2004, and at the World Interreligious Encounter in Monterrey, Mexico in 2007. He's one of 200 international delegates included in the Assembly of Religious and Spiritual Leaders in Montserrat, Spain in 2004, and he currently serves on the Board of Trustees of the Parliament of the World's Religions, the oldest and largest interfaith organizations in the world. Andras was elected in 2006, and in 2009, Phyllis was also elected to the Council for Parliament of the World's Religions Board of Trustees. So, thank you.
You neglected to mention my highest honor. As long as we're doing this. I mean, she gets to talk about Hillary Clinton. Maybe. In 1990, and anybody here, you're mostly Australians, I guess. I don't know if you know who Pat Robertson is. Pat Robertson is one of the most rabid, ultra-right-wing Christian televangelists in the U.S. And in 1996, he went on his TV show in front of millions of people, showed a picture of me and said that I was a bad role model for the youth of America. And I am so proud of that.
And next time, maybe he'll put that in his bio. Although pagans have reputations for lots of things, not all of us are psychic. My name is Angie Buchanan, and I'm a family tradition pagan from the United States. I'm also pleased to and honored to serve on the Board of Trustees for the Council for Parliament of the World's Religions. I was the first pagan elected to that position in 2002. I've attended and presented programming at the Parliament in 2004 and will be also presenting here in 2009. I was also a delegate for the Assembly of Spiritual Leaders in Montserrat in 2004. I have a background in law enforcement and politics. I've worked within the Federal Bureau of Prisons in the United States and for a law enforcement organization. Also served as the secretary for the Democratic Women's Club of Kentucky for a couple of years. And so my entire life has basically been about interfaith because being raised in a pagan tradition, I've always had to navigate those waters. And so I am pleased to be here today and to be on this team with two wonderful people who are also dear, dear friends. And we're going to be having some conversations amongst ourselves, inviting you to hear how each of us comes from sort of a different tradition and worldview and background, and yet comes together within this pagan forum as people of the earth, and the honoring of the divine in each of us, and how we do that both the same and separately. So I'm going to join this panel, and hopefully we don't have to yell because the room's not that big. And I'd like to start out by kind of throwing out a question. And the first question that we're all going to kind of discuss is, we use the word pagan to describe ourselves. And I'd like for Andras and Phyllis to begin to explain what that means to you. And since the word itself has so many negative connotations, why do you use it?
Well, I think the word pagan is a tricky term to use from many standpoints. In part, as Angie mentioned, the fact that to a lot of people it carries connotations that are rather unsavory and negative. On the other hand, even within the modern pagan movement, the word pagan as a label has become so generalized as to essentially lose a lot of meaning. Not that long ago, I was at a pagan gathering in the United States, and they had a workshop on what does it mean to be pagan. And the presenter started out by saying, pagan is anything you want it to be. Well, if it's anything you want it to be, then it's nothing, because it doesn't have a meaning, it doesn't have a substance to it. So the way that I like to look at pagan is, first of all, look at it from its origins, because in its origins, the word pagan did not have negative associations. The word pagan was coined, well, it wasn't really coined by the Romans, but it was primarily used by the Romans within the city of Rome to designate the people outside of the walls of Rome, the people who were the peasants, the farmers, the artisans, and the shepherds and herders, and so on and so forth, who lived in the countryside, who lived close to nature and directly survived from nature. And so it originally simply meant a distinction between urban and pagan. Technically, if you want to go right down to it, the Romans were not pagan, they were urban. They were urbani, not pagani. And if you went back in time to classical Rome and told them that they were pagans, they would probably slap you because they were very proud of not being pagan. So subsequent to that, the word pagan acquired negative connotations, both from the Romans in the sense of being kind of like rubes and hicks and rednecks and so on, and beyond that from the Christians who saw it as not being Christian. I personally like to think of pagan as a practice that is really inherently European, because when we come right down to it, no spiritual traditions outside of the European traditions label themselves pagan as such. So we do. So we're about the only ones. So I think it is most meaningful when it addresses specifically the European indigenous traditions, and then the indigenous traditions of Europe that were focused on a direct spiritual relationship with the natural world that found the sacred within nature. And that's certainly how I apply it to myself, and it's certainly at the core, that definition is at the core of how I and my family have shaped our practice of paganism.
There's little that I would disagree with what you have to say, so what I'll do is add things that I have a very dear friend who I had hoped would be here, an Apache elder, and he said, "Why do you let them call you that?" Because his people were both pagans too. They don't like it, and they know the insult that is in that word. And I answered him. I said, well, if it were up to me, I would not use that word because it's such hard work to overcome the negative stereotype. Before you can even get to a discussion of what you are, you're dealing with all of the prejudice that the word provokes in people. It's what we call a hot button word. So they hear the word and they stop hearing you. And it's very difficult. I was raised in a family of left-wing activists, and they taught me early on, try not to label yourself, because if you label yourself, you actually cease to be audible to the people that you're trying to reach. So, frankly, I have not generally referred to myself as a pagan, and I still feel a little uncomfortable in doing that. It's not what I would choose. It's not what I would choose. If I could label myself and do it in a way that would be sort of universally understandable, I would refer to myself as somebody who is practicing a Euro-Indigenous tradition, and specifically a revival of that Euro-Indigenous tradition. And that would be my choice. However, movements grow, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. And this movement has grown up, and it has accepted that label and has embraced it and has done the very hard work of trying to explain what it is not, so that we can then explain what it is. The other thing that I think is, you said that I want to emphasize, that we'll come back to most likely, is that while there is a world of diversity within the traditions, because it's originally tribal and local and rooted in the land, so there's quite a difference between what you'll find in southern Italy and what you'll find with the Sami, up by the Arctic Circle. There are certain things that are always held in common, and one of those is the sense of the world as innately sacred. There is a transcendent quality to the divine, the mystery of the divine. And that it is always a mystery, but that it is present in the world, that it is within us, that it is within all of creation. And that would probably be the single most unifying thing that you will find within pagan traditions, which have this tremendous variety, that they will all agree. They may call themselves pantheists or panentheists or animists or whatever. The essence that we all share, the cosmology at our core, is the experience, not the belief, but the experience that we are living in a world that is sacred, that the source of creation is sacred, and that it is present in its creation, and that we live in a world that is holy.
For me, when I think of paganism, there is a specific feeling and idea that comes into me. As people of the earth, the basic attachment is to the circle, the cycle of life. And for me, I believe that we're all born pagan simply because we breathe. So, you breathe in, and that's to live. You exhale, and you die. And that is the first sacred cycle of life. You come out of the womb doing that. You don't come out of the womb holding a rosary or chanting Om or doing any of the other religious traditions that are taught to us and overlaid upon us. We come out breathing. And from there, we honor the rising and setting of the sun every day, and the cycling of the moons, and the turning of the seasons and the tides, and life and death itself. And so everything in the world of the people of the earth, of the pagans, rotates on the circle. And so that's the sacredness to me, the cycle of the planet. The planet itself being imbued with a spirit that is not necessarily knowable, or with many spirits perhaps, and understanding the value of the spirit of the land, and in doing so, honoring and being thankful to the people that have held those traditions sacred in different parts of the world for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm thankful for the people of Australia who have held their traditions sacred, and who have been able to preserve what they have for us to participate in tapping into that sacred spirit that is imbued here in the trees and the rocks and the water and the land and the humans who come and with the soles of their feet become a part of that living, breathing divinity that is present here. Why do I use the word pagan? Well, I've always used it, but not always as prevalently as recently. Part of the reason that I use it is because it's a wake-up call. When you say that word, there's a sense of attention, and immediately you can see people begin to process, what that means, and you can see sort of the shadow come across their face, and because they've already applied that preconceived notion of what that means. And so for me to get it out of the way, to dispel those notions is very important, because then you get people to change the track and to think of something completely different. Okay, so maybe all of this that I've been hearing all of my life, has been incorrect. I have been receiving information that is inaccurate, and there's more to this, and I need to be able to open up and hear and to understand what it is that it means from the source, because words are stolen throughout history, and vocabulary changes and shifts, and meanings are not always consistent. And so for a sacred practice to be taken and twisted the way this one has been, the untangling of that has been a mighty challenge. And we're just starting to get it untangled, truly, to a point where the shock value is not quite so great, and there are many individuals who are out in the world who understand now what paganism and its associated practices are, and so they're not as negatively inclined toward it. Do you want to add anything?
I might just add one thing, which is that, as I think a couple of us have suggested, there is the word pagan often carries with it an implicit question, which is, why do you call yourselves this way when it's so negative? And the way that I have found to address that question most effectively is to say to people, when you hear the word pagan, and your immediate reaction is a negative reaction, whether that negative reaction is to feel, this is bad, this is threatening to me, this is evil, this is satanic, this is whatever, or conversely, the negative reaction of feeling, this is stupid, this is silly, this is, what are these people calling themselves pagans, this is ridiculous in the 21st century. Both of those are negative reactions, and they come from the same place. They come from this very ancient prejudice that Phyllis was relating to. And that this is a prejudice that we as a culture, in Western culture, we have internalized. It's a classist, it's a cultural, and it's definitely a religious prejudice that culturally we have internalized for so long that it's become invisible. And that's the worst kind of prejudice, when it's held invisibly, when the people who hold it are not aware of it. So the moment you have that negative reaction, what you're really experiencing is not the reality of what paganism is, but the reality of the prejudice that you didn't know you had, internalized, coming out. So what I ask people to do is feel this in this moment, okay? You're finding something about yourself you didn't know you had. And I'm sure you're a good person, I'm sure you're an open, sincere person, someone who's for social justice and for freedom and for ending stereotypes and prejudice. So please, take a look at your prejudice and let go of it right now. And people go, oh my God. I mean, I had a nun in Mexico go, this really pissed me off when you said this. And I realized, why am I getting pissed off? I'm prejudiced. And she was like, at the end of it, she was like, I think I'm a little bit pagan now.
Of course you know, you're Catholic. Where do you think it comes from?
Do you have something to add? I think one of the things that I wanted to add to that is that, a question that we all need to ask ourselves as we move through in our spiritual traditions is, where did this come from? Where did this idea come from? Where did this concept originate? Well, it came from here. And before that, where did it come from? And before that, where did it come from? And before that, where did it come from? Until you finally trace it back to its original root if possible, or even farther, back than the mind is able to conceive. I mean, there are sites all over the world, like Newgrange in Ireland, and Stonehenge, and here.
Well, there are temple structures that go back thousands of years.
Greece.
There's the cave of the Sibyl of Cuma, and the Oracle of Delphi, and Minoan Crete that goes back more than 2,000 BC.
And so it's important to take a look at these places and to try to understand what was happening there. What sort of worship was going on, and how was it that connected to society? What was the benefit of that worship? What were those people trying to accomplish? And you see a lot of the same cycles in things. In ancient traditions, you see a lot of the same cycles of the born of a virgin, dying or leading a life of suffering, being killed in a horrific way, going into a journey into the underworld, having some encounters there with different characters, and then the rising, the resurrection again. And throughout history of religion and spirituality, this play is consistent. It happens over and over and over again. There's Isis and Osiris, there's Dionysus, there's Jesus Christ. It's all the same dying, rising sun god, basically. And so when you look at these patterns and how they've moved through time and bring us to some more modern religious traditions that are practiced in mainstream today, you see similar patterns throughout them. And we look at our holidays. We look at things like the winter solstice for us is happening in the United States right now. Well, it's the shortest day, the longest night. It's cold, and it's dark. And on the 21st of December for us, a son is born. The son is born, and the days become longer. And some of the traditions that are associated with Christmas are far older than the Christmas celebration. So these are histories and lineages that we can all connect to, that I think are really important for us to know and understand, even if you are practicing a different tradition today. I think it's the responsible thing to do for you to trace it back and to find out where some of your customs come from, and who was practicing them before your tradition practiced them, and what did they look like then, and to honor that succession that has brought you to the place that you are today, where you connect with your own form of the divine in the way that feeds your heart, but to also honor where it came through to get it to where it is now.
There are two things on that, more, but that I think are worth noting. You brought up Christmas as an example. So, just very quickly, if you look at the Christian and to some extent the Jewish calendar, but very much the Christian calendar, and specifically the Catholic calendar, the holidays absolutely correspond with the pre-existing pagan holidays. And I'm not going to bore you by going through the list, but it's another example, Imbolc, which is in the belly, and the return of life, and the womb is Candlemas. And All Saints' Day on November 2nd, in which your ancestors are remembered and honored, is Samhain, the Celtic New Year, which was the day on which the veil between the worlds was pierced, and we honored our ancestors and those who had passed before us. And Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. That's how they figure it out.
I think the piece with that has always affected me the most is the root of the word Easter, which is also the same root of the word estrogen. It's a fertility. It was a fertility celebration of new life,
which is actually a goddess, Ostara, or Ostra. And Bridget, Saint Bridget, was originally the goddess, the Celtic goddess Bridget. We could do hours just talking about the pagan root of the calendar alone, the sacred holidays of the calendar. And the deeper point of that is, one of the things I think that people find most liberating and compelling, and attracting, it was certainly for me, about paganism, is that it is the tradition, it's the indigenous tradition of your ancestors. It's what your great, it's the first religion, it's the shamanism, if you will, of Europe. It is, and in 30 years of not seeking to appropriate the religions of other indigenous cultures like Native Americans or Appalachians, what I found is that through the very deep exploration, going back to the traditions of my own people, my father's side of the family is Scandinavian, my mother's side is Jewish, so I have two deep roots that go. And then following my own fascinations, which happened to take me into Italian culture, I think that people find that deeply compelling, and one of the blessings of that has been that I, over time, slowly and gradually, been embraced by extraordinary, wonderful elders in other indigenous traditions who have begun to recognize in us their brothers and sisters, the people who share their worldview, who share their values, who share their relationship with the earth, who share the sacred circle and the honoring of the four directions and the symbols that we share. I had an extraordinary experience with some Hopi friends of mine in which we sat down and drew symbols together. And of course, we have the same source of wisdom. So we have many similar expressions. And it's an example of an integration of both some classical European pagan symbols and Aboriginal symbols. That's a whole discussion of these parallel symbols and meanings and experiences of the world. When people discover their roots, it doesn't have to negate the spiritual wisdom that they learn from their parents, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Islam, whatever. But in fact, I have found that for many people, by finding the root source of those traditions, it has deepened and enriched their own spirituality. And they have found places where they don't have to choose between one and another. I just re-encountered a very dear friend of mine, who's a professor, who was in a Wiccan circle 30 years ago, and who then decided that she was going to go back to Harvard Divinity School and be an Episcopal priest. You're a priestess, you're not a priest. She said, no, the Episcopal Church, I'm a priest. And she called herself an Episcopalian, which I love. And I have friends who refer to themselves as Jewishes. So I think, I'm being funny, but we are also very lighthearted. And I often say, if you're not laughing, you're not doing it right. And that is one of the currents within our lives and our spiritual views, that there is a joy, a joyousness, and gratitude in having the life that we've been given and the gifts of the earth that we've been given. And when we rediscover our roots, it's very soul nourishing, very profound ways.
And I wanted to do a takeoff on that real quickly on a couple of things that you said. This tradition is the big circle with the big red line through it, no suffering. And I once had a lovely Dominican nun come to me and say, what is the value in your tradition of suffering? And my response was, well, I try to avoid it whenever possible. Because I think in my tradition, I don't believe that this is a waiting room for somewhere else. And so to be able to experience the joy of life here and to be able to understand that there are people that do not have things, it's not a fair distribution of joy and suffering, but that because I have a joyous life, that's the platform that I can come to help the ones step up to that. And so rather than plunging myself down into their suffering, it's easier for me to pull them up into the joy. And I'm not trying to minimize the fact that there is a lot of pain and suffering in the world, but in our religious and spiritual traditions, if there isn't joy and a lack of suffering in your connection to the divine, or you see that, then perhaps that bears closer examining. And the other thing that I wanted to say was, the whole idea of symbols, and a lot of the symbology that we use also gets negative connotation. I wear a pentagram, a pentacle, which is a 5-pointed star in a circle. And as soon as people see it, I get the knee-jerk reaction of, it's a Satanist thing. I just want to say for the record that Satan doesn't belong to us. He showed up right around the time that Christianity began, and he's one of the characters from that cast. We don't know him. We don't acknowledge him. He's not ours. This particular symbol of the pentagram is one of a group of symbols that we refer to as sacred geometry. Sacred geometry has appeared across continent and culture thousands and thousands of years. I think the first discovery of this particular symbol is somewhere along the lines of 7,000 BC. So, we're talking years and years before Satan was even a glimmer in the eye of whomever. And so for me, this symbol, it represents the circle, which we just talked about, the sacredness, that encompasses the 4 elements in spirit: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And if any of you can really remember some of the information that went around when the Da Vinci Code came out, it also represents a human being with arms stretched, legs in a stance, and the head. So, in my concept of this, you are a pentagram. You have earth, air, fire, and water within you. Those are the elements that make you human. And then you're also imbued by spirit, which is what animates you.
I actually want to touch back on something that Phyllis was saying, which I think is very important, about the indigenous aspects of paganism. And you also mentioned the Hopi. And the best way that I can address this is by telling you a brief story. And this is actually something that happened to me at the first modern parliament in Chicago in 1993. Now, I don't know if you have this problem here in Australia as we have in the U.S., but in the U.S. in particular, there are so many white people now who are so enamored of American Indian traditions that they have begun using Native American ceremonies, Native American chants and dances, Native American symbols and so on, and appropriating them and using them in their own practices. And this really upsets a lot of the more traditional American Indian people, because they feel that white people came, took everything that they had, and the little that they have left is mostly their spiritual traditions, and now they want to take those too. So just prior to the 93 Parliament, the Confederated Lakota nations, Lakota, Nakota, and Nakota, had declared war against the New Age movement, against the women's movement, and against the men's movement for appropriation of their sacred objects and spiritual traditions. Now, this was a formal declaration of war. Okay. So at the Parliament, there were all of these American Indian speakers all hammering on the same theme. You have no right to take these things away from us and to use them outside of the context of our traditions. These are our practices and they're sacred to us, and this is a sacrilege. So this was happening everywhere in the Parliament when American Indian speakers were talking. So I went and I gave this workshop that I often give on, it's entitled The Witch as Shaman. That's based on the idea that the people that came to be called witches were really not so much a priesthood or priestesshood, but a form of shamanism in Western Europe. Now, unbeknownst to me at the time, for a lot of American Indians, the word shaman has become a code word for white people stealing things from natives. Right. So I was very innocent. So there was a room like this, standing room only, and as I am about to start speaking, 3 young and rather muscular American Indian men come in the door, stand in the back, and cross their arms like this. You know, and I got what it was about right away, you know. So anyway, so as I gave my spiel, and as part of that talk, I always make a point of saying it's important that we not steal from other cultures and so on, that we have our own ancestral cultures, and we may learn how certain things from them, but not take outright from them. So as the thing is over and people are coming to ask questions, whatever, they come forward and one of them grabs me by the arm and says, "You need to come with us right now." And I said, "Well, can you give me a few minutes?" No, you need to come with us right now. And so they escort me down these halls of this hotel in Chicago to this room. They open the door, and the room is empty except for this little old, well, it wasn't so little, American Indian man, probably in his 70s, 80s, I don't know what it was, with a red bandana across his forehead. He was just looking out the window. And they went and they talked with him in some Indian language, and then they had me sit opposite him, and they told me, "Tell him everything you just told us." And so, you know, that was like an hour and a half, you know, and so, but I gave him a shortened version of it, and he listened. He didn't say anything, just listened and nodded a couple of places. And then when I was finished, he said, "You know, my friend, I want to thank you for telling me this, because I have learned something today that I didn't know before, and that's that there used to be Indians in Europe." And the second thing is that now I understand why white people do and have done to us the things they've done, because they did it first to their own ancestors. And when you destroy your own ancestors, you have a tearing, a hole in your soul that can never be repaired unless you go out and fix it. And so all of these white people are coming here with holes in their soul, and you know, that's why they're doing to us what they did to their own people. And subsequent to that, I went to a talk that several American Indian leaders were having, and at the end, a young white American got up and said, "I understand why you're upset about our taking these things from you and so on, but please understand, the only reason we're doing it is because we don't have anything like that in our culture, in our religions. Christianity, Judaism don't have anything like that, and we crave something like that." And the man that I had talked to in the room turned out to be Thomas Banyake, who was the last keeper of the Hopi prophecies. And he got up and he said, "Ah, my friend, I thought so too, but now I know better. You see those people sitting over there? Those are the keepers of your traditions. Go and talk to them and learn about your own traditions so that you can practice them, and then we can all stand together as sisters and brothers and as equals without having to steal from each other and support each other." So this is important for a lot of reasons. It's important because we as people of European culture, European-derived culture, often ignore that prior to our Christian ancestors, we too had and have our own indigenous ancestral elders, our ancestors. That we have ancestral traditions that still to whatever degree survive into the present. And that it's important if we yearn for some sort of direct spiritual experience that connects us to the natural world, that we use the frameworks that are culturally passed on to us and that we're most directly linked with, rather than willy-nilly appropriate the sacred practices of other peoples whose culture is significantly different. Unless we're willing to really be adopted into that culture, to go live with them, to learn their language, to live the life that they live, which in many cases is a life of poverty. It's a life with, very high suicide rate, and most of us probably would not want to do that. So unless we want to do that, I think it's important for us to really look at where we came from and to reclaim that inheritance and to mend that hole in our souls that most of us have without even knowing it.
So we went right to the two of the things that of course.
We're really the same person, we just...
We can tell by the resemblance. My legs?
Okay. Is that all right with you, dear? Which brings up a whole other question of what deity is, right? One of the dilemmas that we struggle with is the fracturing of our traditions and the destruction of those traditions. So we can be, which takes us to your thing, hard pressed to find what we're looking for. We've looked long and hard, and there are now many people who are looking. They are, in fact, a strand of paganism called Reconstructionists who are really exploring specific cultural or ethnic indigenous traditions, Celtic, Romanian, Italian. There are questions about the efficacy of that in some senses, because you cannot be what your ancestor was 800 years ago. You're living in an entirely different world. So the framework, context determines so much. So, if you're speaking like a Roman from 2,000 years ago, is that bringing you closer to the sacred? It's a debate we have amongst ourselves. It's an interesting question. But in any reconstruction, there are always things of enormous value. And I personally think that it is because of two things. One, the teacher remains the same, which is one reason that we can have a communion with indigenous people of other cultures. The teacher that we share is an embodied divinity. We say that nature is a holy teacher. We speak of the earth as the goddess. We speak of, we may be one of the first religions that knows that it's, it's very self-aware that it's personifying or anthropomorphizing deity. And we understand them as symbols and portals and gateways. But beyond our personification, nature itself, air and fire, water, earth, and the seasons, and the moon, and the tree in front of you, pick anything with which to consciously enter into a relationship, and it will teach you. It will teach you extraordinary lessons about how to live in a sacred manner, about what deity is. In a sense, the physical world for us is, we share this with other traditions, Taoists and others, that the world itself is an embodiment of the divine, that every aspect of creation is imbued with the divine. And so it's a teaching. It's rich with spiritual wisdom about how to live. And that is very much at the heart of our spirituality. So the lessons that we need to learn now may be different in some ways from the lessons that our ancestors embraced. There is a continuity and a similarity. But the teacher remains the same, and the lessons that we need to learn are the lessons of how to live in right relationship with an earth that is dying. And the earth itself, I think, has all the things that we need to figure out how to solve problems. And there's a tremendous reliance upon technology and green technology, and all of those things are critically, vitally, essentially important. But without a fundamental shift in our perceptions and our ideas and our relationship with the earth itself, machines are just an extension of the existing mindset. We're not going to fix things with machinery. We're going to fix things with a new relationship with the earth, and an understanding that the earth itself is sacred. And when we approach the earth in that way, with reverence and humility and attention, there are lessons there, tremendous lessons about what balance means, about diversity, about unity, and what harmony means. It's rich, and it's accessible to us. The second thing, I think one of the reasons that this has become so popular, in addition to this relationship with the earth, at a moment when people understand, even people from religions who contributed to the problem, which is that we have a system of practices. And they're culturally, there's a cultural variability, but there are also core practices, and things that we share with other shamanic or indigenous cultures. And they are the techniques, they're the means by which we remove the blindfold to see the sacred. And they work. So we don't deal with texts and dogma, we deal with technique and experience. And it's fascinating to me, as we were talking about earlier amongst ourselves, that we may come from very different cultural directions or origins, but if you work it, it will work. By using these practices, we come to the same framework, the same sense of understanding, the same values, the same gratitude, the same humility, and the same sense of incredible joy that we're living in a world that is alive, not inanimate, but alive and sacred, and that we have a means of being in communion with that. That there are ways that breath alone, a lot of sacred traditions, that breathing alone is a technique by which we engage in the cycle of life, that when we're inhaling, we know that we're receiving a gift of life from the plants. And when we exhale, we're giving them a gift of life. So every breath that we take unconsciously, constantly for our entire lives is a sacred act that's connecting us to this circle. It is a circle, and it's connecting us to the circle of life. There are endless techniques like that that enable us to see where we are and why we're here.
I think to just tag on to that, also in seeing the earth as sacred, instead of as something to control or to have dominion over, you don't destroy what you see as sacred. You protect it, and you get to know it. And so by keeping those traditions alive and by encouraging others to connect with one another, to learn the traditions that are so old, we are able to keep this alive and perhaps move into a space of teaching the rest of the world how those connections are made, and sort of shifting the focus and the view into viewing the one thing that no matter how we choose to worship or to connect spiritually, we all share this planet. And it's the responsibility of each and every one of us to protect it and to view it as something of value, to be protected and not exploited.
I want to say something about this that I think is, to me anyway, feels like one of the major problems that modern paganism has to face and resolve if paganism is really going to have a meaning beyond anything somewhat superficial in modern times. We talk about nature, we talk about venerating nature, about celebrating nature. The reality of it, however, is that modern paganism is almost an exclusively urban phenomenon. We're city people, okay? We live in cities. Cities are artificial environments created by humans to maximize human processes for efficiency, for comfort, and so on and so forth. You know, we create human environments, that concentrations of humans in small, relatively small areas that are just not found in the natural world as an organic process. It's fairly recent in human history that that's happened. A couple of millennia. But anyway, cities are really urban, are human-made and human-controlled environments. And so it's very easy for us from within that environment to view nature and to talk about venerating and celebrating and honoring nature at a distance. So it's very easy, first of all, to objectify nature, to see nature as a symbol, not to actually perceive and experience directly the reality of nature, which goes beyond the symbol. It's very typical, and I'm sure when I say this, a lot of you who are pagans will know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, to have a pagan ceremony in somebody's nice, climate-controlled home indoors, you know, on a very cushy carpet, you know, and you know, you do your little bit of oming or whatever, and then you turn to the east. And in the east, there is this beautiful painting of these clouds, you know, that show that. Then you move toward the south, and there's maybe a picture of a volcano or a picture of a bonfire. You go to the west, and there's a picture of the ocean, you know. And then you go to the north, and there's a picture of great stones, you know, or a stone circle, or this forest with trees and stuff like that. And you know, and I'm not saying this is useless. I'm not putting this down. I think it's wonderful that people are doing this, and that people are doing this not only by the thousands at this point in time, but by the millions around the world. We are several million of us around the world. But and then you do a little guided meditation where for 20 minutes or so, somebody talks you into a journey where you go to the sacred stone circle, and there you meet this wise person who tells you something. Or you go to the sacred healing well, and you drink from the waters of the well, and you're cured. Or you go to the great forest.
Right, they get your point. They're all going.
Keep going on. To our ancestors, this was not a symbol. The stones were there. The stones were goddamn heavy to move for many hundreds of miles without the benefit of, tractors and things like that. They had to be erected over a long time. The sacred forests were there. The trees were actually there. And the sacred well would get you wet. It would get you wet. These were not objectified, symbolic, distant realities, but immanent realities that were physical. Okay. And being physical beings, if our religion is not connected to a physical reality, we lose something. We lose something that our ancestors had, what was key to being a pagan, to what the definition of pagan was. Okay. Beyond that, I also think that it's important to notice that paganism really was a cultural phenomenon. In modern times, we have developed, the people who sort of developed the pagan movement in modern times, developed it specifically as a religion, but paganism was never a religion as such. It was a culture. It was a culture of the countryside, of people who lived close to nature, and they did not even have words for religion, because their religion was inherent in their everyday lives. It was part of their lives. So essentially, we have attempted to create a religion without a culture. And that's a problem too, because religion and culture go hand in hand. And culture supports and maintains religion. Religion brings its perspectives and its insights into the culture so they can take root in the culture and into the lives of people and be perpetuated. When we try to create a religion without a culture, there's a vacuum. We need a culture. So what culture do we inherit? We inherit a mainstream, modern, Western culture that is thoroughly Christianized to the point of invisibility, because there's a lot of stuff in our culture that is totally Christian and we see it as normal, because it's been there for so long that we have ceased to realize that this is actually specifically Christian values, Christian morals, Christian principles, Christian structures. Okay? And so they don't go well together. We're attempting to do something that the mainstream culture that we take part in every day of our lives, in every facet of our lives, does not support. And so what winds up happening is that paganism tends to stay at a fairly superficial level. It becomes, well, it becomes...
It may start at that level, but if you continue the practices draw you from symbol to experience. They move you from the living room to the forest.
If you do it. Yeah, look, my family and I lived for 30 years in the city of Boston. We were pagan, so it's not saying that you can't be a pagan in the city. Of course you can. But we packed up everything, and we moved to the country. And we live in a small farm in the middle of a forest that's thousands of acres, and that's where we live. And I have to tell you that our experience of paganism has deepened and has expanded and has reached levels that I never knew in all the years.